Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and I'm so thrilled today to be talking to some of the incredible artisans from the series Dopesick. We are joined today by showrunner, director of episodes 7 and 8, and executive producer Danny Strong. We have the wonderful cinematographer Checco Varese, Nick Offord, who's a sound re-recording mixer alongside Ryan Collins, who's also a sound re-recording mixer on the show, Chi-yoon Chung, who's an editor of episodes 3, 5, and 7, and Douglas Crise, who is an editor for episodes 1 and 2. Such an amazing group. And Danny, I wanted to start with a question for you in the way that you've approached telling this story, because I think you've done such a beautiful job at telling a very intimate portrayal of these characters and the different stories that you've threaded narratively throughout the series. And at the same time, you've created this really searing look at the opioid industry and this huge kind of much larger dialogue and conversation. And I was interested in how you really found the balance of always driving everything forth in this very intimate character direction where things feel incredibly grounded, but also being very aware of the larger topics and dialogue that you're creating through the show throughout as well.
Yeah, well, first off, thanks so much for having all of us. And it's so exciting to see this incredible group of people who I've not seen in quite a while. Huge congratulations to everyone on all your well-deserved Emmy nominations. It's really cool to have us all together in this Zoom, and a lot of fun for me. And Chi-yoon, what's the name of your dog? I feel like we need a proper.
Jean Lee. Sorry, I was trying to hide her, but she's very small.
No reason to hide. She can be a part of this panel. She'll probably be a key member of the panel. The balancing the personal and sort of the global is a key part of the storytelling of what we were up to, right? Which was telling the story of the opioid crisis from the ground floor to the halls of the Justice Department, getting into the macro politics that caused this and the micro personal stories of the victims of the lies and the deception of Purdue's marketing techniques, but then also discussing personal issues of addiction and how we take these drugs sometimes to numb our personal pain as well. So it's not, I didn't want it to be two-dimensional or easy or simple because addiction is a very complicated subject matter, and the business of addiction and the business of these drugs is extremely complicated. So the challenge was, how do you tell all these intertwining stories in a way where it can work as entertainment, where it can function as a dynamic piece of drama that people want to watch? I did a podcast yesterday where the host said he didn't want to watch the show, but his parents talked him into it and said, no, it's really great. You have to watch it. Well, if the show's not really great, his parents aren't going to talk him into it, right? So there's a buy-in there. There's an obstacle, which is that it's dark subject matter. And all of us collectively on this Zoom, we have to overcome that obstacle by creating a piece of vibrant, exciting entertainment. And so that was also why I framed the show around two investigations, because that's an exciting genre. It's a mystery, it's a detective story. And that's something that an audience can grasp onto and create entertainment value for them, while simultaneously all the other stories that we're talking about here, the tragedy of addiction, this out of control criminal company, can then splinter off from this foundation, which is a popular genre.
And then coming over to you, Checco, and talking about the cinematography of the show, I was interested, with what Danny was saying about the fact that it is interweaving all of these different strands and storylines, and the visual aspects of each are so distinctive, and each storyline kind of has its own look and feel to it. And I was interested in that early dynamic in making the series, in working alongside Danny, and then also Barry Levison, who was directing the first couple of episodes, in really figuring out what are going to be the distinctive elements that are going to, create a linear feel amongst all of these story threads, but also the ways in which we want to use camera movement, shot placement, lenses and color to kind of have slightly different looks and feels to each of these stories that we're going through.
Well, one of the biggest challenges of working in Dopesick was the fact that it is a real story. So these characters that exist This is my cousin, your cousin, actually, your brother, your sister. How do you make that palatable? How do you make that interesting without putting a filter of surrealness on it? So we had to be as clearly documentary as possible without doing a documentary, because it's not a documentary, it's an entertainment piece, like Danny very wisely said. And it was extremely complex to force myself and all of us to not say, okay, let's do this very cool camera move because it's gonna be great and it's gonna be fantastic. And no, this is about people. This is about somebody's soul. This is about somebody's death. This is somebody's mourning. This is somebody's shareholder very happy because he made a fortune killing people, adding to the killing of people. So it was a very tricky balance, and I have to say, Danny was always there to sort of make sure I wasn't carried away with these wonderful camera moves that didn't mean anything, you know. And we were surrounded by a crew of wonderful professionals. And the most important thing that I have to say is that every single member of the crew had a cousin, a brother, a sister. This was very important for them. To me, I'm not from, you may gather from my accent, I'm not from the United States. And this is a very unique American problem. I mean, Brazil has other issues. You know, Manila has other issues. Mexico has other issues. The United States has this issue, which is you trust your priest, your whatever, and you trust your doctor. You go to your doctor and the doctor gives you this. And then after that, you get addicted and you most likely get really addicted. How to portray that in a very grounded way, yet being entertaining and yet being fascinating and yet being a mystery and being a thriller and being an action sequence. Some sequences that are action, some sequences that are pure drama, some sequences that are, you know, like a legal drama. So that was a very complex thing. And I think with the help of Barry and Michael Cuesta and Patricia Regan and Danny, the 4 directors that I got the pleasure to work with, we pulled off, and the editors and everybody else and my grandmother, we did something that still keeps you wanting to watch it more, but it means something for whoever had something like that. I don't know if I answered the question. I went all over it.
No, I really, really love all of those details. And, you know, Nick and Ryan, you also have this similar task. And when you listen to the sound design on each of these stories, there's distinctive elements, because obviously the fabric and makeup of several scenes in a conference room is going to be very different to kind of what are the sounds and what's that feel and ambience that you want the audience to feel in a rural kind of coal mining town. And so what did you find in the mix with some of the really distinctive elements that you found yourself bringing to the foreground a lot more in certain storylines?
Yeah, you know, like was said before, we really wanted to make it feel, you know, real. I mean, tell these people's stories and connect with people in the small town and feel like you're there, you know, while not stepping on any of the incredible performances. So that was a very conscious effort on our end, you know, just to support everything that's happening on the screen. You know, and also we made a decision early on too to follow the storylines with some sound design, and Ryan can talk a little bit about that too, is follow the arc of some of the characters to make it a little bit more interesting and a little bit more impactful and real as the story goes on.
Yeah, I think one of the greatest things about this show is that you really early on fall in love with these characters, right? Like for us, I mean, Dr. Finney was such an amazing role. I mean, Michael Keaton was so good in it. And so from a sound design perspective, we really wanted to establish that his life before addiction and what that was like, you know, and the sounds of the town. You know, we'd play birds and wildlife and just really play up those atmospheres. But, about halfway through the season, when we start to see this turn into addiction, all those sounds slowly get muted and more isolating, and sort of we just follow that arc of him, his sort of, his demise with addiction and all that. So that was a bit, I mean, I think it sort of happened subconsciously because it just really, it worked with the visuals, but then it's like, okay, this idea we need to really make work.
Following his arc with, as his life deteriorates, the sounds around him deteriorate, and the quality of life diminishes. So we wanted to make sure that you're really feeling that again, in a subtle way without stepping on any of the performances or anything. And the score that Lauren Balfe did was incredible too, and getting that emotional connection, like with Betsy and the scenes with her family and what she's going through. I mean, it's very, very powerful stuff. So,
and what was great about the score, and I know we were always on the mix stage, and Danny was sort of guiding us through how to place these scores in the room. And it's like, it was never like, let's play this really loud so everyone knows how to feel. It's like, we don't want to step on these performances because we feel what our characters are feeling, and so the score was just there to support the performances.
I really love that. And then in talking about the editing with you, Douglas and Chi-yoon, again, kind of similarly to what Danny was saying at the beginning about, really finding the voice and the tone in how do you tell all these different types of stories in one piece. And with that approach, I was interested in how that kind of came over into the edit room on a lot of the episodes when you first came on board and you first started getting footage and putting together those early rough cuts and just really trying to figure out what does the voice and the tone of these episodes need to be, and what's kind of the specific pacing and rhythm of the way that we're moving between these different storylines and these different kind of thematic elements of the narrative.
Well, I would say, one of the nice things about working on a project like this, you're lucky to have a great director, and you're lucky to have good writing and everything and great performances, and that makes my job so much easier. So, but there's a thing that you like in episode 1, the story was, we put it together pretty much how it was written. And there was always the concern about jumping between the different timelines and how to work that in. And, and I think Danny came up with a great device of doing the scrolling dates. And one thing that Barry influenced me to try to, in the opening episode, was when it wasn't written quite like this, but when Dr. Phoenix goes into the church and he's greeting all the people in the church and talking to them, we're cutting back to him sitting on the court bench and remembering this, and as opposed to just how it was originally written, where it was kind of like we see the church scene and then we go back to the courtroom. So we interlaced it so that it plays it in his mind, and he's reliving the horror of what he went through.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was a great idea. I loved it when I saw that, when they set the first cut. I just thought, wow, that was terrific.
Yeah.
And for you, Chi-yoon?
That was actually, I was like, that's one of my favorite scenes. And there's a couple of scenes that really stick with me. And that scene that Doug in episode 1 was, I remember seeing it and just being super blown away and very sad. But for me, it was that whole keeping all the threads alive. I don't know if we rearranged all that much stuff, Danny. It was for my episodes. I don't feel like we did as much rearranging in my episodes. But one thing that Danny did sort of happen early on for us was that we had these courtroom scenes that weren't quite working. And Danny's like, why don't we actually do snippets from earlier episodes or from websites that illustrate what they're talking about? So what ended up happening is that we intercut some footage from episodes 1 and 2, and then also some stock and some stuff that graphics made up. And it really made that sort of procedural scene kind of come alive. You sort of kept all the threads running. And that's one of the examples that I can think of that was it sort of started running through the series when you get to this procedural thing and you can't quite remember exactly what happened. There's these snippets of images. You're like, oh yeah, I remember that. That really helped, I think, keep all the sort of story threads alive.
Absolutely. And I loved what Ryan was saying in terms of the sound design with Michael Keaton's character. And just as he goes on this journey into addiction, the way that the isolation is created through the use of sound. And there's so many other ways that we start to really feel that isolation and separation from everybody around him in terms of the visual language, in terms of the way that story is kind of paced out differently once he kind of goes through that phrase. And so I was interested for all of you in, particularly thinking about that as a structural arc, kind of how you started to make different creative choices as his storyline progressed as a character in the way that you wanted to tell that story on screen.
Editorially, you mean?
Yeah, I mean, for any of you that kind of had any different choices that you were making in the way that you wanted to tell that arc.
Checco, you got anything?
When you grab something as vast as Dopesick, which is, Danny, correct me, 15 years, 18 years of story, 1994.
Yeah, about 11.
All the way to 2006.
Yeah.
So when you grab something that large, I rented a little apartment, and I got some little cards, cue cards, and I started creating a wall with Post-its. And I started creating an arc until the owner came and said, "What is that?" And I said, "Don't worry, I'll paint the wall." So I create this massive little stickers of, okay, what happens with Dr. Phoenix? Because you, as a cinematographer, you have to know what happens to him. You don't know at 8 o'clock in the morning on a Wednesday what's happening. Where is he coming from? Where is he going? Danny knows, but I didn't. So I had to create that. And you follow the arc of each character, and you follow the arc of the little minor daughter, the father, and the mother, and the tragedy you have. But you have to start somewhere. And each character is so rich in what they live and what they do that as a cinematographer, you have to somehow pay homage to that. So, the little town was, blue and sort of cold and gray. We were lucky or unlucky. It snowed, so it's wonderful, it's beautiful, it's cold, freezing, horrible. It's like 24 degrees below zero to work, but it would look amazing. I didn't do much. You just get some northern light through the windows, and that's what the characters have. You go to what I call the civil servants, the characters of the prosecutors and the DEA and the people that have a decent salary, but they're not the Purdue Pharma. They have a salary, and you have to create their arc. So I had this wall of tape, and it looked like a crime scene, with little red things and blue things all over the place. And I remember one night looking at it and getting absolutely, completely overwhelmed. Because I'm like, what am I doing? I'm not able to do this. I'm not able to pull this off, I went to sleep. I had espresso in the morning, and I said, okay, let's go and do it, And with the help of all my friends and all my colleagues and Danny, and my directors, I think we pull it off. You have the characters that have a life or a death or whatever, and you follow their true line, you follow their spirits, you follow their souls. And if you're true to that, with the sound, with the cuts, with the writing, with the camera moves or not moves, most likely you don't move the camera because there is no reason to move it. They come alive, and the performances are extraordinary. If I don't mess with it, I did my job.
Yeah, you've got this along the lines of what Checco's saying. There's the macro, and then you deliver that macro scene by scene. And the foundation of it, it's all sketched out in the script or in the scripts. And then, you go to shoot it and you go to post, and you're really trying to deliver that potential of what the script is laid out. And if the script's not good, you're in a lot of trouble. hard to make a bad script work in post. It's funny, on set, sometimes you can convince yourself like, it's going great, this is great. And then you get in post and you're like, oh yeah, those script problems, there's still problems. But I'm also very, when I get into post, it's not about sticking to the scripts. It's not about the words and the writing. It's about making the story work even better than it worked before. I kind of view post as just, we're writing again, but now we're writing with footage. And so I'm very open to big changes, small changes, reordering. I'm not precious at all. I will cut scenes, sometimes ruthlessly, sometimes too fast. But it's really about how to make these episodes work as well as they can. And you just roll up your sleeves and you get into it, and you get lucky that you've got two great editors. And we had a third editor, Matt Barber, who also was a wonderful element of the team. I mean, I had three incredible editors on the show, right? So all three of us worked together to try to deliver these episodes as good as we can. And then you get into, what I view as sort of the final, the frosting on the cake, which is sound. And it's like your last shot, right? And making this all work. And these guys did, just fantastic work. Just hearing them talk about, what they did with Phoenix's character, right? And removing sound as the journey continued, and he propelled further into darkness of addiction. And we're all trying to do that. Everyone here on this Zoom are trying to do that every step of the way with all of these characters and all of these storylines. And I'm so glad, Nick, did you bring up Lauren or Ryan? So whoever brought up Lauren,
Lauren,
the score is incredible. It's an incredible score, and it is such a rich score. And it's such a powerful score for something that is also pretty subtle, not trying to be noticed. And there's a soulfulness with a few of the melodies that can play as a tragedy, or they can play even in the thriller storyline at times. I mean, I was in awe of Warren and what he did musically. And it's those two final, that's like your final shot at like trying to not make it work, but to mine as much emotion and depth as you can in the process. And, I think I'm a pretty calm person on set and pretty calm in post. And then when I'm in that mixing stage, that's when I'm a little less calm.
You were calm, Danny. You were calm. You were great.
But it's that final moment. I have a tension in the mixing stage that I don't necessarily have on set, because it's the end of the road. This is it, and then we're all done. And when you do a final mix, especially on an episode of television, you're there one day, and that's it. It's it's pretty crazy process. So it's like just like the last shot at trying to make all of this work as well as you can. And what's incredible about this process is how many wonderful artists are involved to make this work, right? I mean, the people here on the Zoom they're the best of the best. To have the jobs they have, there's thousands of people that would want to have their job. Same with the costume designer, the production designer, all the designers and the actors, just there's just all of these wonderful artists. And it's actually my favorite part of being a showrunner or a director, is to sort of be like in charge of a group of incredible artists. And I love artists, and it's fun, and I want them to have fun, and I want us to all just kind of come together to try to make this work. And that's one of my favorite parts of the whole thing, is just all these talented people all working together in service of trying to get the story to work.
Absolutely. And Nick and Ryan, kind of coming back to the sound a little bit based off what Danny was saying about, capturing that emotional hit. I wanted to ask you a little bit about some of the intricacies with the scene where we see Caitlin Dever's character Betsy in the mine getting injured, because I think there's such a delicate balance in that scene, because we don't yet know the full extent of where her journey is going to go following it, but it's such a crucial moment for that character. And it's also early in the show. And so the audience is kind of still building and developing that emotional connectivity to her as a character. And so were there certain intricacies that came with a lot of the sound balance that you needed to pull into that particular moment?
Yeah, that moment was, I mean, it's one of the most dynamic moments of the show, I think, is when that happens. We were working a lot with trying to figure out the emotional balance with the music as far and how that's going to work with the explosion in the mine. I mean, you could probably talk more about
Yeah,
the
I think,
explosion.
I think at one point that scene was kind of scored all the way through,
Yeah.
and we played with this idea of, okay, let's start it out in reality, right? We're in the mine, we have all real sounds, and then once the chaos of the explosion happens, that's when we sort of duck out of like the real sounds, and then the score takes us over with Betsy, and it's sort of more emotional feel.
Yeah, once there's a kind of, we mixed it in Atmos, so in the room it was really cool because we were able to place explosions above our heads, and you could really kind of feel the environment of the cave and the claustrophobic nature of it. So once you kind of started to feel that rumble, we were sneaking in little tension score and kind of building up what's happening. And then as the chaos starts to happen, we Ryan and I found a nice place to kind of get out of the score and let the impact of the explosion really hit. So you could hear her hitting her back on the machine, and it just, the way that we sculpted it with using the music for emotion and tension, and then getting out of it and letting the design take over, I think was really impactful.
Yeah, I think what a lot of people don't understand about mixing, it's very subtractive. You have all this stuff, right? And it's like, well, we can't play it all.
Yeah.
It can't all play loud and proud. So you need to pick moments, and what do you want the focus to be? Do you want it to be on the reality of what's happening, or do you want it to be more emotionally driven by the music? So that throughout the whole series, that was something that we sort of played with, but that scene in particular, we're proud of the way that turned out.
Yeah, I love that. And with the editing, Chi-yoon, I've heard you kind of mention that part of your process is, when you first get the footage, just kind of putting everything together and starting to put together a rough cut, just very quickly. And so for you and Douglas, I was interested in kind of when you first get that footage and you start creating those rough cuts, kind of what's your process for then going through and kind of starting to just really fill out a lot of the scenes that you want to kind of step into finessing and just really figuring out the intricacies of each of these moments, especially for a show like this, where there are so many scenes in every single individual episode. And like you were talking about before, you're kind of jumping back and forth between these different tones throughout.
I used to, when I first started cutting things in my career, I always loved the rough cut. I always dove right in and was like, I'm looking at me chopping this together. And now I kind of agonize more. Now I don't want to just chop it together and have it be horrible. But sometimes that's the best way to do it, because I have to struggle sometimes to just put stuff together. Once I got it together, then it's more fun. It's just kind of like I've built something, now I can tear it apart. And sometimes it's fun to let an assistant assemble something for that reason, because I can immediately see what they did wrong. So as opposed to if I would have done it. And then it was like, so I kind of tend to, if I can have my druthers, is I'll say I'll get 5 scenes in one day. I'll slap them together in an hour, and they'll be horrible. And they'll be, words cut off, everything else. But then I go back and I'll work on them, and I'll get them pretty good by the end of the day. But then the next morning I'll go back and I'll work on them again before I start the new stuff, because I want to see them the next day in a clearer light and play with them some more. And I like to have that luxury when I can. And it's just sort of the process I prefer, because then I can start playing music and things like that even too. And one of the advantages we had on the show is Lauren gave us samples of music to work with from the very beginning. So we had basically music ideas from the very beginning that I got to put in, and I tried my best to use just his music, sometimes maybe to my detriment, because I would maybe this piece needs something that he hasn't supplied me, but I wanted to try to use what he's provided just to keep that tone and keep that sound for that music throughout the whole process. So, and I'll let you know.
That was amazing. Just to toss in on that, Lauren sending music before, and to not temp with temp tracks, because there's that moment when you switch from temp to your own score, that is one of the scariest, most painful moments of the entire process, because you're so used to the temp, and the temp is like Desplat and Williams and all these great composers who've gone through the process themselves, right? So now you're starting from scratch, and it's a terrifying moment. And so to have music before that you're using was just huge, and in a wonderful way to work. So sorry, Chi-yoon.
No, I was unbelievable. We got like 3-minute pieces that we've all like kind of that we rearranged for all these different scenes. It was really helpful and wonderful for him to do that. For me, it's funny because Doug was like, I'd like to, cutting something in like a whole bunch of stuff in an hour makes me go, oh my God, I'm so slow. But I'm a little bit more OCD in that I like to look at everything. Sometimes I go backwards, forwards in takes, because then usually when, you know, I feel like when people move on to the next setup, they're like, oh, we got it, we're going to move on. So I go backwards sometimes, but I like to look at everything because I like to see what the evolution of what goes on set is. And then I will try to cut the scenes as best as I can. And then I will put it away like Doug does. For, you know, I don't do it the next morning. I try to give it a couple of days, because you go back a couple of days and you're like, oh, that's weird. And then you go back into the footage and start mining for stuff that'll work. And also when other things come in, it gives you a better perspective sometimes, and then something you've cut and you're like, you know what, this happens later. I don't think that's going to work in the, earlier. So then you go back with that in mind. But yeah, that's, I like to go through everything. And I also it gives me a sense of what's going on set. Like you can tell when people are getting tired, or sometimes you can't tell. You're like, oh, this scene's pretty good. And they're like, oh my God, it was the end of the night. We're just trying to get out of there. And I was like, oh, that totally worked. I don't know what you're talking about. But yeah, I really like looking through everything at the very beginning.
Yeah, well, I do the same thing. I do watch everything. I will let Danny know.
I was like, oh my God, are you just like?
No. I watch everything before I start. But,
okay.
But the one thing I was going to say, I once worked with a director who, when I was working on his cut, obsessed about he had to have every scene perfect before we would go on to the next scene. One day he kept me on a scene for 2 days, and I'm like, can we please move on? And that's the way Danny's one of the great things. He's not like that, thank God. And it's like you work on a scene and you move on to the next one, and you go on to the next one, you go on to the next one, you do your changes, your little changes here and there, and then you can see the big picture again, because it's always about looking at the big picture. And then you know that scene I worked on in scene 2 needs to change because the way it cuts to the scene 3 and scene, they don't go together with with how they were assembled. So they have to be changed. So I love the way Danny worked, the way Barry works, where it's kind of like, they're very fast. They'll go through. He gives me a lot of notes and does it very quickly and says, okay, you go work on it, and then get me back on the Evercast. Let me see it. And it's a great way to work.
Can I add too about going back to the temp score, that when you guys get temp score that early, that trickles all the way down the line to us. So, when we get to the mix stage, like for Danny, you're so comfortable with the score already. And, considering we only have a day with you, that really helps us dig into other things that we would like to get into. So, I don't know if Lauren realizes how much of a help that is all the way down to our end too, so it really helps move things along for us and gives us kind of a head up time wise with you in the room, so we can make sure everything else is sitting the way that you want it.
And we have accurate material to work against. So when we're mixing the temp, it's like, well, it's going to come to us better, but it's the real material. So we know how we're going to mix around it.
Yeah.
I really love that.
Thing is when I'm in the mixing stage, and I'm so sensitive to music and sound, as you all know, I get obsessive about it. And then all of a sudden there's score, and there's just a new instrument in the track that I've never heard before. where the fuck did this violin come from? What is going on here? And then I start to like lose my mind because I think but am I going crazy?
Yeah.
And they'll just be like, someone will make just some last second change that's never been in a cut, going through the music, and it's always very disconcerting when it happens, but it's just, but it's wild. Like what is that, Nick Ryan? Have you experienced that a lot?
I don't know, but I do know that there was a couple of times where you would hear something and you'd say, "What is that?" And you'd say, "But I don't hate it."
Yeah.
But I don't hate it.
Well, I want it to be warm, no, and it would be because it would be like, because it was it would jolt me because I hadn't heard it before.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, okay, it's not, maybe this is a better version than what it was, but it's new to me, and it's unsettling. And then it takes me, and then I listen to it a few times and it's like, no, it's actually better.
Yeah.
But we'll listen to both versions and then make
Sure. Oh yeah. I mean, that's the beauty of it, of
Yeah.
having everything split, is that we can, manipulate any way we want. But yeah, I do remember a couple times it was, I don't hate it. That was great.
Sometimes I did.
But you were very open. You're very open, Danny.
Yes, we
Of
appreciate
course.
that.
That's the process.
Yeah.
It's never personal, Danny. We know that.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so genuinely in awe of the incredible work that you've all done on this series alongside the rest of the team that you created it with. So congratulations on everything with the show. And thank you so much for talking about it. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you.